Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. Part of me keeping calm, staying local, and keeping it Baltimore Positive is having incredible people in my life. This guy I collected many, many years ago. I had long hair, I had a ponytail, went down to almost the belt on the back of me, and I walked into Tochterman's Fishing and Tackle on Eastern Avenue in Fells Point, probably in March of 1992, and I met this guy. Tony Tochterman joins us this morning from Fells Point. Man, I tell you what, man, these viruses and lockdowns and shutdowns, they make for strange bedfellows, Tony Tochterman. It's great to have you on. I'm embarrassed that I don't have you on more often. Good morning. How's fishing? Fishing's one thing we can do, right?
Yeah, well, fishing is one thing we wish we could do, but in the last dealings that have come out from the state, which unfortunately, again, they have outlawed no fishing in the reservoirs at this particular area. And you would think that because they've outlawed, kayaking and hiking and everything else, that, wait a minute, how much more lonely can you get from being a kayaker in the middle of the water? You're definitely not more than 6 feet away from anybody. But then we have to think about the resources in case something would happen to an individual in one of the reservoirs. Then we have to take people and resources away from people that are fighting the virus to do this. So even though it hurts my business, in the long run, it's more important to take care of my customers than to take care of the cash flow.
Well, first things first. You were my first sponsor. You and Peter Martucci from O'Toole's Fireside Inn, Ritchie Highway and Georgia Avenue and Glen Burnie.
Yep.
Columbia Sports underwrote me 28 years ago, gave me a beautiful jacket. My mom, at one point before she died, still had a beautiful Columbia jacket in her life as well. And, all of these years, and you're still here. I used to come and see your dad there many, many years ago. And D and your store. Tell me your story, because I've met your dad dozens and dozens of times over the years, but I never say, and I see the stories on the sides of the walls, and Dan Rodricks has been my friend since I was a kid, and Lefty Cray, and when I was out in Montana 2 years ago, I really, really felt foolish for never taking Lefty Cray up on his offer to take me fly fishing. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, that's a whole sideline story right there. But basically, it's the company which we started selling fishing tackle, which made us pretty unique because we started out as a fishing tackle company, and no one else that we know of in the world ever started out as a fishing tackle company back then, because that's before the United States got into World War I.
What does a fishing tackle company mean? What would a fishing tackle company do in 1910 or 1916? Excuse me, I want to get your year right. Go ahead.
That's all right, 1916, yeah. In fact, our opening day was February the 8th, to make it exact. But
that's the day I met my wife. How about that? It was 2003. It was a few years later, but go ahead.
But we started as a fishing tackle company, but back then, where the Children's Museum is now, it used to be the Fisherman's Warehouse, and that's where people at the fish market. And my grandfather was a manager at one of the stalls down at the fish market, and because of lack of refrigeration, and at that time, where we are now at 1925 Eastern Avenue, it was the main thoroughfare from downtown Baltimore, so to speak, all the way out to Hollandtown and Essex.
Well, the streetcar ran on Eastern.
Streetcars ran
that's how my parents wound up where they were. My parents were married in Mount Carmel in Essex. They settled in 1951 in Colgate on Eastern Avenue, but the number 23 and the trolley and the streetcar, it's how people moved around in the 1930s and 40s, right?
That's correct. And so, therefore, since they lived here where the business was, they moved to the second floor and figured on the first floor, while my grandfather was working at the fish market, they had an excess of bait and fish, and therefore he said, on the weekends, let's bring some home. And my grandmother would make codfish cakes, crab cakes. She would make different types of candies, and they would sell that for bait to go fishing, because people had a lot of time then to do extra. And they would also fish, believe it or not, in the harbor and take fish to go home so they could eat. So we figured it was a good thing. We didn't. My grandfather did. Thought it was a good idea. And so he worked the fish market. My grandmother stayed at the store. And, of course, they added more rods, more reels, more hooks. And then they added candy. And then it went on from there. and the rest is history. So, 104 years later, we're still selling worms.
Well, you were my first sponsor. You were the first person to ever believe in me and write me a $50 check back in 1992. And I appreciate you. I love you for that. Your whole story's up here. You go to Tochtermansfishingtackle.com. What keeps you in business all these years later? I mean, you this has been your whole life, right? Like, did you ever have any other jobs? Did you always work for your dad?
No, I had a stint back in the 60s in the Air Force and the Air National Guard for a few years, and that's the only other job that I had. I started working for my father again at 5 years old in the retail store, and he had me just cleaning, dusting glasses, wiping off lures, and
he still had you doing that in
great.
'92, as I remember when I met you.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
He still had you doing that in '92 when I met you. I
still do that yesterday. So, if you got to clean windows, you got to wipe down lures. It doesn't matter. Again, it's when you go to work, you have a smile on your face because the people are coming in. They're either coming in to go with their kids or away from their kids. They're going with their wife or away from their wife. But whatever they're doing it because they want to do it. And the good thing that we see more and more families, we see more and more couples, and we see a lot more people taking the advantage of fishing as a sport to community to get the kids out of the house. And the fishing part is the outdoors and the scenery, and fishing and catching fish is the bonus. You go fishing for non-catching fish. You go fishing to enjoy the fishing experience. So that's what makes it a little bit different. And what makes it successful are two things. Number one, most importantly, is our clientele that's been coming in for years and years and years. We have 2, 3, 4, 5 generations that have been coming in our store. And they're the ones that keep you alive, and they're the ones that are family. And a lot of people will say, you're saying something along that lines for a PR thing. Baloney. People that know our store, know us, know that they are family. We know their birthdays. We know their kids. We know what schools they go to, because that's what life's all about. It's not the bottom line. It's not the paycheck. If that was the case, I promise you I wouldn't be selling worms. But, it's the idea that it is really a family-based, and anybody who wants to spend a Saturday in the store when we're open would be more than happy. Come on in. Entertain yourself. You'd be amazed at how friendly everybody is. And one little note about fishing. You can go anywhere in the world, and you can have a lacrosse stick, a baseball bat, you can have a soccer ball. But if you have a fishing rod, if you're in an airport, nobody comes up to you really and says, where are you going to play soccer? Where are you going to play baseball? But you got a fishing rod, where you've been or where you're going. And it doesn't matter whether you own a multi-million-dollar corporation or whether you're a little guy, again, that has a minimum wage that just wants to go fishing. Everybody is equal in fishing, and that makes a big difference.
Tony Tochterman joining us here, my first sponsor. Before there was WNST, there was the Sports Forum on WITH AM 1230. I had a ponytail. I drove up in front of Eastern Avenue over on the east side. I literally just drove around town, walked in and tried to figure out who owned the business and whether they could bet $50 and let me read some ads and hopefully sell some gear and some rods and reels. And, sport fishing, in my life and being in the sports department back in 1984, 85, 86, Bill Burton was someone that I got to know, and as a little boy, I would watch Channel 2 News, and Jack Dawson would come on, and Bill Burton had the map of Maryland, and I had my Baltimore City map back here, but he had the Maryland map, and he would always put the yellow perch if they were biting down at, Dundee Creek or whatever it was, and he would have it all, done out, and when I got to the Baltimore Sun in 1986, Tony, Bill Burton was a legend, right? I mean, he had the pipe, the whole deal.
And Bill was the real deal when it came down. In fact, the Sun paper had some fantastic writers all the way back with Cofield and with Burton and with Lefty Cray. I mean, you're talking people.
Legends,
Bill was the
larger than life, right?
guy. He was the guy that everybody in Baltimore knew because he was the local guy. He was the guy that would sit at the bar with you, have a beer and whatever. Lefty was the guy that traveled outside the area. He was the one that went on the exotic trips, and he's the one that discovered certain things. And, of course, he was basically the father of modern fly fishing. And so two different worlds, but Baltimore was very lucky to have those two guys in our presence. That's for sure.
Well, I got two stories. First one, Bill Burton. Bill, every time I drive to Ocean City with my wife, and the first 10 years we were married, we didn't go down to the beach a whole lot, Tone. We just were going other places. Now, every time we go, I go across the Bill Burton Bridge. Mm-hmm. And I say to my wife, I'm like, I knew Bill Burton well, but more than that with Bill is that he took off a couple of weeks a year. And whenever he took off, someone had to ghostwrite the fishing column, right? Like it was a special report.
Yeah.
Guess who that guy was, Tony?
Who was that?
That was me. And so when Bill Burton, I got an extra $25 to write a story, right? So they would, Jack Gibbons. God bless Jack. He's still out there, and athletes. Hold on, I'll get Jack Gibbons' company because I want to get it right because I'm going to get it wrong because I was just out with him. I don't want to mess this up because Jack will give me a hard time if I do that. It's Athletes Serving Athletes. I want to make sure I get it right. Athletes Serving Athletes, wonderful organization. Jack was my boss. Jack's the reason you know me. Jack gave me my first job at the paper. So Jack would give me $25 to go do the Bill Burton thing.
Sure.
And I'm like, Jack, I don't know anything about fishing. I mean, I caught some crabs down on Bear Creek one time. My Aunt Clara had a rod. And we used to fish for sunfish up in the creek up in Delaware. I don't know anything about fishing. You don't need to know anything. Bill's going to grease this up for you. And Bill came down to the paper. He's like, all right, first thing you're going to do, you're going to call Solomon's, and you're going to, and then you're going to call Tony Tochterman. He's going to tell you this. And then so he gave me like 8 phone numbers. I made 8 phone calls. I asked 8 guys like you that asked me where the perch were biting, and I wrote a little piece, and I got $25, and all of a sudden, there I was. I was the ghostwriter for Bill Burton's fishing column.
Another part of Baltimore history.
Well, yeah, but Lefty's even better because if I'm going to talk fishing with you, Tony Tochterman, we got to get into this because my wife's going to come running in here and give me a hard time because this is. I don't like golf, okay? I don't like golf, okay? My knees aren't...
Your golf people will not like you saying that.
Well, but I just not something I'm going to do. I mean,
sure.
The ball doesn't move. It's not athletic. I'm not a Republican. There's a lot going on with golf that's probably not for me. So, like, tennis, not for my knees anymore. But, Tony, I'll be honest with you. Fishing is something I would do, that I could do. To your point, it's something that at 52, to say I'm an idiot. I've not never fished. I've been out on a lake with Dan Rodricks and I went fishing at Pretty Boy together once, about 20 years ago. Okay, so
Dan loves fly fishing especially, again. And you were talking about Lefty Cray, and if you want to have a very interesting 5-minute segment, I would like to talk to you about Lefty Cray and things that people do not know about Lefty Cray.
Well, let me give you my Lefty story, and then I'll let you go nuts on Lefty because I don't have a lot of regrets in life, Tony, right? But Lefty was always, like, I knew Lefty way better than I knew Bill because Lefty came into the office in the morning a lot, and I was just getting off work, and I was bored. He was a fisherman. He'd come in at 6 o'clock in the morning, beat the traffic. I'm going to come down here and beat the traffic, got to get down here, get my paycheck, and I got some books I got to pick up. So Lefty would come down, and when I was learning the world and traveling, 86, 87, 18 years old, 19 years old, the first time I ever wanted to go to the Caribbean, I'd saved up $1,000 or whatever, and I had a travel agent. I was going to fly down to Puerto Rico or whatever. And Lefty sat with me for 2 hours and brought a map out, bought an atlas out, and said, now here's Nevis. They got diving there. These are the Cayman Islands. And this is like, this is when these countries weren't even on a globe because they were tiny little islands. So Lefty and said, anytime, kid, you want to go fly fishing, I'll teach you. I'll take you out there. And Mike Marlowe and Larry Harris and these guys, they would be like, you're an idiot if you don't go fly fishing with Lefty Cray. And at this point in my life, there were no girls on the water, Tony. There was no rock and roll. There was no Judas Priest. There was no Hammerjacks. There was no beer. Beer was big in my life at that point. There was no football. There was no baseball. So Lefty, while he was a cool old guy who told me stories and invited me, and everybody told me what a legend he was, I never took him up on it. And now, in retrospect, Rodricks has written this book, and I want you to go nuts, and I'm going to have Dan on at some point when he gets a couple minutes free and have him on to talk about Lefty as well. But I went to Montana with Mike Marlowe in 1994, who lived there. He was Jack Gibbons' assistant, a sports editor, who was a mentor to me and a dear friend. I caught up with him a couple weeks ago, and he lived in Great Falls, Montana. But Tony, we went out there in February. Okay, so it was ice fishing or no fishing at that point. Okay,
what am I doing here?
So 2 years ago, Pearl Jam announced a tour, and they were playing in Missoula, Montana. And I said to my wife for 25 years, I've been to Missoula. I'm going to take you to Missoula one day. And my wife loves the outdoors. She has always wanted to go to Yellowstone Park. So 2.5 years ago, or a year and a half ago, summer of 18. So there you go. So we went out to Boise, Idaho. We drove from Boise all through Montana, Yellowstone, the whole thing. And every single postcard you've ever seen, anything you've ever done, there's a big cliff, and there's a little stream, and there's a little road around a bend, and there are guys in the water in waders, and they're fly fishing. And this went on for 450 miles in 3 days of driving. And every time I looked in the water, I turned to my wife did a lot of the driving. I turned to her, I said, you know what? We're going to come back here, and we're going to do that. And I'm going to figure out how to do that. So, Tony, Lefty Kreh has brought us together all these years later in 2020 in the middle of a pandemic. That Lefty would say, I would have told you about the damn pandemic. I fished over in China. I know about pandemic.
So well, he knows something more than a story that I think that before I get onto that real quick, I remember the first weekend there was an individual, when you were talking about beer, there was the first weekend that an individual you may have heard of where you and me went down to the Bay Cafe, and his name was Mike Messina. And Mike Messina had his first beer in Baltimore with you and me at the Bay Cafe.
That is true.
So that goes back quite a while ago. And then after that, talking about Lefty now to go back on it, Lefty Kreh, let's face it, people know that he's the most famous fly fisherman in the world, bar none. My dad sold him his first fly rod back in 1947, and that's a whole other story. But getting on to the person Lefty Kreh was, and you said Lefty Kreh would spend 2 hours with you. Lefty Kreh had his phone listed in the white pages up to 5 years ago. So any John Q. public could call Lefty Kreh at home, his home, and ask him any question. If you were 2 years old, 5 years old, 50 years old, didn't care who you were, he would answer your questions. If you were some hotshot trying to rub elbows with Lefty because you could say that, he'd drop you like a hot potato. He's taught 3 different presidents how to fly fish. He gave John Wayne lessons. I mean, he has also been named the #1 most influential fly fisherman of all time by the Fly Fishing Press. So this is a man that is unbelievable. By the way, the top 50 people of all time, 8 were regular customers of our store, so we're really proud of that. But getting on to the pandemic, Lefty Kreh worked in 1947. He was a guide got a fly fisherman, but he was a guide also for doing catfishing and things like that. And he loved smallmouth fishing, and he caught fish to feed his family. Now, moving on, later on, he worked for Fort Detrick, and there was something referred to as anthrax. And anthrax was something he would clean the tanks out where the anthrax was being made, and there was 3 guys in the lab. There was an accident. Lefty was one of the guys that the accident happened to. 2 of the 3 guys died. Lefty caught it, and he survived after a month. And to this day, the serum that is used to treat anthrax is called BVK1, Bernard Victor Kreh 1, because his blood is the original blood used for the first serum to treat anthrax.
Wow. Tony Tochterman, man, fishing and stories.
And we all have that story. That fish was this big.
Before Tony came on, Tony's like, man, all these years I've never really been on a show with you. I'm not much of a talker. You're going to have to do all the talking. And I'm like, come on, man. You got stories for me. Lefty Kreh, he was in the Battle of the Bulge?
Yes, he was. He never talks about it. He never talked about his military career. He was, there's a great book called, it's called All the Best, and it was written by Flip Powell about Lefty Kreh. And there's also a video, but the video I don't recommend, even though it's in his voice, is the fact that it's he and Lefty and Flip sitting in Lefty's backyard in 2 lawn chairs, and all the camera is watching them both just talk. I mean, so it's nice to hear his voice, and that's the one thing I yelled at Lefty about. You should have done your books. I think he did 26 books, and I think that you should have done some of your books in his own voice, because if you knew Lefty, he had his own style. He knew how to pause, how to write a joke, and so for that reason, I am very proud to say that he was a considered friend. My first trip, as you were talking about these out-of-the-way places, he took me in the 60s to a place in Belize back then, and at that point there was one, I guess you could call it a camp. It was 2 buildings and 1 generator for the whole camp, and that was it for 8 people. And so I was lucky enough to learn around-the-world trips with him and fish with some of the best. Mark Sosa, Lefty Cray, Boyd Pfeiffer, just there's been so many people that I've been blessed with in the fishing industry. So, yeah, it's a great sport, and if anytime people want to talk about it, they want to come into the store once we're allowed to be open, I'll be glad to share some of those stories. And we also have a collector's case, too, of some things that go back to the turn of the last century that people were saying, oh, my grandfather, my great-grandfather had some of those, and we'll be glad to let you some history about them. Also, talking about sports people, I guess our most normal sports person that came in on a regular basis, you may have heard of, too, a guy named Ted Williams.
Ted Williams was a fisherman, right?
Oh, he was a great fisherman, a good friend of Lefty Cray, and I could tell you some off-the-wall stories about him and Lefty, too, because let's face it, Mr. Williams was not exactly a people person, and but
he was built for fishing.
But he was great at fishing, and he signed a ball for me. It says, to Tony, your pal Ted Williams, because Ted Williams' first baseball that was ever autographed was to Ted, your pal Babe Ruth. So it's a special ball that we have in a place because my dad helped him design, because we were a supplier of Sears Roebuck for over 20 years with our fishing tackle. My dad helped him design the Ted Williams series of fishing tackle of rods and reels for Sears Roebuck.
How many Lefties Deceivers have you sold over the years, Tony?
I would say more than I've had beer.
That's a lot. Tony Tochterman joining us here from Tochterman's Fishing and Tackle. I still hear the voice of the commercial from 30 years ago with Kim Knight's father. Joe Knight did your commercial back, and
oh my goodness,
and the commercial, I can hear it in Joe's voice, but I can do a better Lefty than a Joe. Not cheap, choice is what the ad said. Not cheap, choice. Family tradition. It all started with candy and peelers. You can read the whole story. See Tony and Dee up on the site. Anything you want to say about worms? I mean, you talk about worms. I mean, worms are your life, right?
Well, again, it is Dee's life. Dee is referred to now as the Worm Girl. And, in fact, she's been cited. In fact, Candy Thompson, who was another good writer to some paper, which I admitted I didn't mean to, Candy wrote a great story about Dee and her bloodworms, because she's known for her bloodworms. And a funny story, I came down from a doctor appointment. I'm waiting for a cab. And the next thing I know, I look down, and in the big sum papers, little canisters that they used to put the papers in, you put your quarter in, whatever. There is my wife on the front page of the Sun paper in full color of her picture counting worms on the front page above the fold in the major headlines. And that article went around the world, and she's been featured in 7 different countries with her and her worms. So, yeah, it's a different world and a lot of stories that could go on and on about fishing. But that's the Worm Girl. That's my wife of 30 years, and we're very, very happy. So,
teach me something about worms I don't know. I don't know much about worms. I mean, I used to go out for night crawlers. My cousins fished up in Delaware, so we go out in the middle of the night, and sometimes they'd stop and buy them, but it was more fun to pick up rocks and try to get them yourself. But
that's how we all started. We all went to the garden and picked up a couple of night crawlers. And night crawlers are earthworms. They're basically something that comes out of the ground and primarily used more for freshwater, for non-tidal fishing, where bloodworms is something that, and night crawlers can be raised on farms. But in bloodworms, which is a more expensive bait because they have to be dug almost on a daily basis. And then, of course, they're dug, and it's very hard work to do. A digger can go out in the mud, in the water, when the tides go out. And think about this, taking a shovel or a rake, digging up a foot of mud to get no worms or 1 worm or 3 worms, put them in a bucket. This is how heavy that wet dirt would be. And then you take a step and you go another shovel full. That's a lot of backbreaking work. And that's why worms are primarily expensive, because once they're dug, they're taken to a separator. The separator then takes them, packs them, ships them to you. And that's got to be done daily. And it's really not a shelf life for bloodworms. But Dee found out a solution. There's only 2 people in the country that did this. And one was a scientist, and the other one was Dee. And she found a way where the shelf life was no more than 10 days. She has found a way to keep the lives of the bloodworms over 4 months. And so it's a lot of work, but she found a way, rather than throw stuff away, she found a way to save that versus, throwing it away. So pretty good, pretty smart girl.
Bloodworms available at Tochterman's. Don't eat them. Go take them, catch the fish, and bring the fish home. Eat them. We got time on our hands, and I want to spend it with folks that I know. Tony was my first sponsor in 1992. I tell everybody that, and we're going to stop by and say hello. And one day, you and I will get out. We should go out to Loch Raven just because it's next to my radio station because it's easy, and just cast a rod into the water and just sit there and have a cold one and hang out for a couple hours. What do you think? Do you think I can calm down long enough to do that?
I think that would be very, very good for both of us, and I would look forward to it.
100 years in business in 2016, 104 now. It's amazing how many of my friends, I was wearing my Cole Roofing hat. They just celebrated 100 years. 1919 was their year. Your year's 1916. I hope you have another 100, Tony. We'll get over there and visit you guys. From a business perspective in the shutdown, anything you want to just say to folks about ways they could support you, support your employees? You've had the same people there forever. You truly are a family business. This has been tough times for everybody, but I think we're all trying to stay chin up for what's ahead, right?
Yeah, and I guess the best thing I can say is we're all in this thing together, and try not to be selfish. Think about the fact that you want to protect everybody around you. I would rather close up and have a struggling time for us for a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, whatever it takes, because in 2 months, when we're back up and running, we'll be together. It's a hell of a lot more important than losing someone that's close to you. So a little common sense, people. Again, remember, we'll get past this. We're Americans, and we can beat anything.
Tochterman, since 1916, find them 410-327-6942. You know where they are on Eastern Avenue. You can find them at tochtermansfishingtackle.com. What a fun conversation that was. If only Lefty were here to join in, right? That would only make it better.
He's with us.
Take care. Be well, all right?
Always a pleasure, Nestor, at best.
Love to Dee. Tell her I got to come get some worms from her. Tony Tochterman, Dee Tochterman. Go find them over at Tochterman's since 1916 and since 1992. My first sponsor back in the winter of 1992. Not at WNST, then WITH, the Sports Forum. I had a big ponytail. Put some fun pictures of that stuff up. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. We are telling stories. We're hanging out. We're keeping calm. We're staying local. We're always Baltimore positive. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and Baltimore positive, and we never stop telling great stories about fishing and Baltimore history.